That was quicker than I
I also have my
thought.
debit card and my driver's license.
What's that?
You also have my debit card and my driver's.
Board of Commissioners budget hearing. Today is Tuesday, August 22nd, 2023 at 2:00 p.m. Please silence all cell phones. A copy of the Nebraska Open Meetings Act is located on the north wall of the county boardroom. We'll call the meeting to order. We have present today Commissioners, what is your name again? Commissioner Kelly, Klug, Warren, Mixon, and Burmeister, along with our County Administrator Dan Hoynes and our County Clerk Deb Hotaling. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 4.1 is public hearing fiscal year 2024 proposed budget presentation. Bill Conley, CFO, recommended fiscal year 2024 budget hearing presentation with final values.
Good afternoon. Just a little background. This is a required public hearing where we go through and present the annual budget. I am going to walk through some slides. I would just point out to you, and you have the slides. We have the slides printed outside. They are available on the sarpy.gov website as well. And this is a public hearing to talk about the proposed 2024 fiscal year budget that was recommended by the Budget Committee. And we'll make the session open for public comment and other comments later after I get done. And it doesn't give me any great joy to spend a lot of time on financial numbers as much as you might think, but we are going to spend some time today. So walking through the slides, and my objective here is to try to point out the takeaways on each of the slides. And so I'll do that as we go along and not belabor, and I will assume that you can read and dive into the slides later. So now I've lost the slides. There we go. Okay. So the first order of business is we do 4 levels of budget. We did a level 3, what we call the level 3 budget that we file with the county clerk by the end of July. And this slide describes the changes from that version to the version that is in front of you today. The version of the budget at the end of July was $70,542,000. It increased $272,574,000. Our budget increased $228,000. We got the final numbers from the assessor for valuations, so that caused an increase in revenue of $216,000, and we had some adjustments on some grants. So I can explain that further, but that is every year we always have some changes between the third and fourth budget level budget. So the budget highlights, this is kind of the summary. This is the big picture of what's happened and what is included in the budget. The total levy in this proposed budget, it remains the same as last year at .28496. The valuation increased 14.6%. I will spend a fair amount of time talking about the valuation in Sarpy County. In the general fund, that fund went up a little over $10.5 million due to the wage increases that were negotiated with the unions and the non-union employees. We added 5 new FTEs. There were requests for 17 new FTEs for this budget. 5 were included in this budget before you today. We also have the costs of full year costs of adding all the new correctional officers that we added over the last year, and other new positions that were added last year. The big story in the general fund is that we are replenishing and raising the general fund budgetary reserve. It goes up over $5.6 million. And as you recall, and I have a few slides on this, the budgetary reserve established by this county, we were not in compliance with that the last 2 years, and this budget will get us back in compliance. And we have some capital projects. I will talk about those later. On the public works side, the public works expense budget goes down. That's because we're holding less money in our bond. When we issued bonds last for the road projects, we're managing those internally. So we have less cash in those bonds, so that's why the budget went down. ARPA, that budget is down about 10 million. Again, we've spent down our ARPA money, so we have 10 million less than we did last year. So the budget is down. We have about $12 million remaining. And you can see other funds, sewer funds, and Keno, and I'll talk a little bit about those later. So the big picture is we're talking about a proposed budget for 2024 of $272,800,000. That's down almost $17 million or 6% from the current year budget. I always like to remind you the Sarpy County budget is fairly complex. It includes 40 funds. We have a general fund, our largest, which has 30, 40 departments, and then we have 39 other funds, and each of those funds have to operate autonomously. So this is a budget that shows the total picture. So I'm going to walk through, I have a few slides that'll walk through the total budget, each of the line items, and we'll just describe some of the major changes. And I guess let me back up. The budget for county government, as a reminder, this is Refresher 101, is it's not just revenues versus expenses. Cash from leftover cash flows back into the budget. That's the way local and state governments do it. So our beginning cash balance is $122 million. That flows in as, in essence, revenue or resources. We will add to that a projected $150 million in revenue for a total resources of $272 million. And then we have to budget that exact amount because the budget has to balance. So that's the big picture. On the cash side, our general fund cash is down about 1.1 million from prior year just due to timing of items. There's nothing really significant. As I mentioned, the road construction bonds, we have $21.5 million less on hand. So that's why the cash is lower, and that's why that budget is lower. ARPA, we have spent down ARPA funds, so we have 10 million less in cash there. And then you can see the others. So the big story is we have less road construction bonds on hand and less ARPA money. I always love to show this. It's kind of a spaghetti chart, but it just shows how our general fund cash, which I look at, if not every day, certainly every week, how it changes over the course of the year and how cyclical it is. And so we almost always have our lowest cash month in February. And then when the property tax payments start to come in March, and then it increases from there. So just something that I want to keep an eye on so that we make sure that we have adequate resources for the county. So on the revenue side, the budget is $150 million. It's up. That's an increase of $12.7 million from the prior year. We are budgeting an increase in $4.3 million in local revenue. The treasurer's office represents $2 million of that. I know investment interest or interest income is a large piece of that. Higher interest rates are really driving that, as well as higher cash balances. And then intergovernmental payments increased about $1 million in the budget. Federal grants are down about $400,000. There are a couple grants that we are no longer have in place. State revenue projecting to go up $1.3 million. $800,000 of that is due to increased highway allocation funds for our road projects, and The JJC has about $600,000 in terms of increased funding from the state for programming. And then property taxes, increase of $9 million from the prior year, and we'll talk again more about property taxes over the next few slides. So our interfund transfers is where we transfer money from one fund to another fund, are down about $1.5 million, really for no particular reason. We just didn't need the cash in the other funds this year as much as we did last year. So property tax revenue, there's a lot of numbers here. Let me start upper left-hand corner. The valuation that was provided by the assessor's office for Sarpy County in total is a little under $25 billion, the $24,831,380,000. Compare that to the right for the prior year, 2023, and these are budget years. They would use, calendar years would be 2023 and 2022, but in any event, it's an increase of $3.1 billion in valuation over the 2 years. That's 14.6%. You can see again, the budget contemplates the levy being the same. So the calculated tax revenue is $70,759,500 for the current upcoming fiscal year. The bottom part of this shows the allocation of that between the general fund and the bond funds, the correctional center bond fund. And the big picture there, the takeaway is really the total levy for the county is the same. The components between general fund and bond fund just changed slightly. And we just did that to make sure that we had enough money in the bond fund, but not too much, not more than what was needed. Again, this slide shows similar information. The current year valuation, $24.8 billion valuation for the county versus $21.7 billion in the prior year, increase of $3.1 billion. That's a 14.6% increase. So what's the growth and what's the reappraisal components? So the value attributed to growth is 3.5%. And so the reappraisal is about 11.1%. I put on here that number in the middle called real growth. That is the real growth. For LB 644, they decided that the state decided that we should have a different calculation of how we determine what growth is. So there's a little bit different formula, and so they calculate growth slightly differently to come up with that. So under LB 644 regulations, a county or a city or school district can levy and take in property tax that is 2% higher than this real growth percentage. So I just wanted to show this to you, that in our case, that calculation is the 4.54% plus 2% or 6.5% increase in property tax dollars would be allowable. For us to stay under the LB 644 threshold, we would have to lower our levy. This is a small type at the bottom of the slide, by the way. We would have to lower the levy to 0.265017, which would be a 7% reduction in the levy, and would require a reduction of our budget, both revenue and expense, of approximately $5 million. This chart shows the valuation trend over the last 15 years plus, and showing coming to the current year of, again, $3.1 billion of total valuation increase. 2.4 billion of that is due to reappraisal, and approximately $750 million of growth. Another chart that we always show is, again, what's the total growth, just showing it in bar chart format. So this is a large growth year in terms of valuation increase, largest over this 14-year period. This chart shows our annual tax levy. For the county going back to 2009-10, a year ago, the county made the decision, this board made the decision to lower the levy to 0.28496. And that at that time and for that year did keep us under the LB 644 threshold. That was a 4% reduction in our levy. And then again, showing in yellow there on the right-hand side, the proposed levy for the current year is keep it the same at 28.496 cents. This slide shows the impact to a, I guess, typical average Sarpy County homeowner. So the 2023 column in kind of the middle there is based off of the average home value from the 2022 average residential value study that was done of $252,000. So on average, reappraisals of homes or increases are about 11%, some higher, some lower, but on average, that's the case. And what that results in to this homeowner from Sarpy County's standpoint is an increase of just under $80 a year in property taxes.
But that's only the tax for Sarpy County.
That's only the tax to Sarpy County, yeah.
Thank you.
This slide I updated for the meeting this year, which shows the total tax bill to within Sarpy County. What are the taxes paid to schools, cities, county, SIDs, and so on? The county moved down a rung in terms of the order of what taxing jurisdictions are from highest to lowest. We're now third. So 12.7% of all tax dollars paid in the county go to the county. By far 56.6% of the property taxes that citizens pay in this county go to schools. Almost 13% go to the cities, and so on. Just giving you the background of where a person's property tax dollars go. So I've talked about cash and I've talked about revenue, and so the total of those two, again, $272 million for the upcoming year. Any governmental budget has to balance, and so we have to have $272 million of expenses. And so, and no budgetary presentation would be complete without a pie chart. So this shows the data in pie chart form of just total resources. We get half of our resources to fund our budget from carryover cash, and then about a fourth of our budget comes from property taxes, and a fourth comes from everything else. So on the expense side, the big picture is on the general fund. I've mentioned this before. We are increasing the standalone general fund budgetary reserve by almost $5.7 million, and I have some slides on that. I'll just wait and talk about that. We have wage increases and 5 new FTEs that accounts for a little over $2.2 million. Health insurance went up about 7%, $600,000. Other insurance, I know you're aware of the NERMA increase that we had this year, was about $400,000, and that went up 49%. And then everything else is $1.7 million. So public works funds down $20 million again. We have less cash, so the expenses are down by the same amount. And ARPA is down $10 million because we've spent down our ARPA funds. So let's talk about the budgetary reserve. This county had in the past kind of mixed reserves that were for a specific purpose with those that are not reserved for a specific purpose. And so my effort has been to that, and the best practice and even our policy says, when we have budgetary reserves, they need to be non-committed. They're not tied to a project. They They are for the county, for a rainy day, for an emergency, for us to make sure that we have adequate cash to respond to situations. And we put in place a policy a little over a year ago based on the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association best practice of 2 months. So think about your own household budget. As a county, we're only saying we're just going to have 2 months of reserve in case we need it for an emergency. And so that's what this budget entails, is a 2-month, is a charge to have 2 months in reserve. And much more of it you can see is green this year in terms of general fund, and a lot less is our inheritance dollars, which we had kind of counted as reserve and also kind of counted towards specific projects, which we really shouldn't do both. So we've gone back and looked at that and made sure that truly we're only counting money that is not reserved for a project here. Total reserves in this budget are uncommitted reserves are $17.2 million. This slide shows the formula that we use. We include the general fund, public works, operations, and E911. And we just want to make sure that we have a reserve to cover ongoing operating expenses. We exclude capital expenditures for purposes of the calculation. So what is the percentage? The target minimum from the budget standpoint, from the policy standpoint, is to have 2 months or 16.7%. You can see in 2022 and 2023 we were below that threshold, and then this budget in front of you gets us above that target and puts us at about 16.9% in terms of budgetary reserve. This next slide shows the total expenditures grouped into, we took all of our funds and we pushed them into about a dozen main categories. And again, I've talked about general fund. You can see the public works funds, again, is down because we have less construction funds from the bonds that we issued for roads. ARPA funds is down 10 million. So really the story, if it sounds repetitive, it's because that's kind of the main story going through the budget. And I just want to make sure that I highlight that. Otherwise, a lot of our funds are not changing in a dramatic fashion. So more of the pie charts, and I won't spend much time on it, but these just show graphically the allocation of our expenses to various activities, whether it's roads, public works, public safety, and so on. And I won't make too much comment on that. This shows expenses by type, whether they are for operating expenses or capital expenditures. Personal services, in essence, people costs, are about 1/3 of our dollars overall. Capital expenses are about 1/3, and then everything else is about 1/3 if you want to summarize our budget. And speaking of capital projects, I wanted to highlight some of the major capital projects that are included in the budget. I mentioned, and you'll be hearing later today at the regular meeting on the road construction 1 and 6 plan. There's $50 million in 2024 in the 1 and 6, and there's $50 million in the budget for that. Actually, there's 65.9 in the budget. We have excess amounts that'll carry forward. Again, if we have the cash, and we still have some cash from that road bond, we have to include it all in the budget. So we've got Scott's 50 million plus 16 million that'll carry over to future years. So that's why that's showing as 65.9 million. We have about a little over $5.2 million for the correctional center. That's to complete that project, to do the wind down, to do the removal of the old jail, and a variety of end of project costs for that. I'll talk a little bit about that project in total in a minute. We have $4.3 million in sewer improvements funded through either sewer funds or ARPA funds, projects that you've already seen. We have some master plan improvements to this campus, about $2.8 million. A variety of IS projects that have been approved, ARPA funded by this board already. The outdoor the outdoor warning siren system improvements that you've already approved, funded by ARPA, are included in the budget. So we have a busy year planned from a capital expenditure standpoint. Road projects, I just wanted to show the history of road projects, really a testament to Public Works and Scott Bovick and the team working together and our outside consultants to really make some things happen there. In 2023, 2022, we spent $53 million in road projects. This last year was just under $40 million. Again, planning to do $50 million next year. A couple slides on bonds, and I haven't included all of these in the past. I just want to spend 1 minute on it. This county, because of the actions of this board, which I highly applaud, has a AAA bond rating. And I don't ever think, and I know you don't, I don't think any of us should ever take that for granted, because that's really tremendous. And it's not typical of counties across the country. We're only one of 108 AAA rated counties in the United States. I was going to look this up. I don't know how many counties there are. I used to know that. I think it's 6,000 or 7,000. So that's we're in the top 3,200. We're still in the top 1%. That's still awesome. And but anyway, I think it's always something to point out that we do a lot of things. And when I talk about the budgetary reserve and why we have a budgetary reserve policy, you know, people could go, well, why do you need that? Well, this is one reason why it's really, really important that we have reserves, and we can convey this to our rating agent, that if something happens, we have adequate reserves to get through something. That enables us to get this AAA bond rating. So what does that do for you, right? Well, AAA bond rating allows us to sell bonds. I mean, when we go to the market, we are an attractive bond for a bondholder. And two, we're likely going to get a better interest rate than someone, we should get a better interest rate than someone that is AA or single A or even worse. So it pays off. It benefits the residents. I know you know all this, but I'm reading it into the record, I guess, if nothing else, to make sure that if you didn't, or if someone didn't, that they understand that this is really pretty unique and it's a big deal. The next slide is a new slide. I just wanted to point out, this shows all of our debt that's outstanding as of the end of the year. We have a total of $166 million of bonds, and that includes our a small note that we have on the 1102 building. Notably, our average cost of capital for these bonds and this debt is 2.6%. And I think last week I read that the average mortgage rate is 7% in this country. So again, credit to this board and this county for funding projects at rates that cost us less in terms of debt service. Finally, a couple quick slides on the correctionals, one on the correctional center. That project will wrap up and will go operational here in the next 30 days. The big picture on that is that we went into this with a budget of $79.9 million. Credit to Ryan and so many others that have worked on the project. And I shouldn't go down the list because I will miss somebody. But the entire team have done really great work and a lot of challenges. We're going to come in on budget. And so the funding is shown on the right-hand side. I think our office tried to be creative in using different funds. We went into it thinking we were going to have to bond finance 60 million or more of this. I can't remember what the exact plan was, but I know it was north of 60 million. And because of funding that we were able to use in one-time funding and ARPA funding, we only had to bond finance a little over $40 million. Again, that'll save us money down the road as a county. And I've mentioned ARPA quite a bit. Just a brief comment on that. As a reminder, this county received a little over $36.3 million of ARPA money. We have spent 2/3 of that. We've spent $24 million. We have about $12 million left in a variety of projects, and this next year will be a key year to get those projects completed. We're getting closer to the end of life on when those funds need to be spent, and so we are going to continue to monitor that and really evaluate that very closely from our standpoint. So that's the overall of the budget. I want to talk about the process. Next Tuesday, there will be resolutions on the board to adopt the 2023-24 budget. We also, every year, we authorize an additional 1% in restricted funds. Restricted funds, and I'll talk about it next week, but that's another lid, so to speak, on the county that authorizing this doesn't mean our budget goes up. It just gives us a little more flexibility, so we always seek that approval from you. On September 12th, we will come back because we have to provide a notice of this meeting with a resolution to set the tax levy rate. Assuming that the budget goes forward in a form that's similar to what we're talking about today, we will need to, as a county, participate in the LB 644 joint public hearing on September 21st. So I put that on the calendar. And then the deadline to file the budget with the Nebraska State Auditor is the end of September, September 29th. So that is my overview of the budget. I know this is a public hearing, so you probably want to open it up for that.
Perfect. I think what we'll do, first I want to say thank you, Bill, to you and Jenny and your team for your hard work. It's a heavy lift, and we really appreciate all you do for the budget here. We're going to start with questions from the commissioners of Bill on the budget, and then we'll read in 4.1A, and then we'll open the public hearing from that point. So we'll start with commissioners' questions of Bill on the budget portion.
Thank you. Bill, thanks for the brief. Outstanding job this year, keeping all our financial matters in order. One of my concerns as I look at this budget, well, I have a couple, but one of them is the fact that we've been providing a lot of essential services over the last couple of years with ARPA dollars that are soon to be disappearing. So there's a lot of things that may keep somebody awake at night thinking about, or worrying about. What worries you most about what we know today and what the future may hold with regards to funding for county operations?
There are a couple things in there I guess I'll comment on. One, the ARPA funding that we received, we did form an ARPA task force. We adopted, again, GFOA standards on that we were not going to use ARPA money to fund ongoing operations. I applaud the board and the county for almost entirely doing that, staying true, using it for one-time projects. So I think the absence of ARPA money isn't going to hurt us. And what we've done as a county we've really leveraged the use of that ARPA for one-time projects to make the county better. We use $13 million for the correctional center to ensure that we have mental health and other resources, for our people that are incarcerated there. We've used it for just a lot of one-time projects. So that isn't, I don't worry about that long-term. That's why, I think the budget is before you today is a very responsible budget to ensure that we have the reserves that we need going forward. If we had a budget that was cutting the reserves or continuing the county on a path that we were under the target reserve of 2 months or 16.7%, I would have increasing concern.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe the way I think of ARPA funds, and I know we used it correctly, and the ARPA committee did an outstanding job, but we funded a lot of one-time projects that in the future, we'll have to find other sources to fund those kind of things, and they were absolutely necessary projects across the board. So what keeps me awake at night, what I worry about is we'll be able to keep doing things, because we've accomplished a lot of great things in the county. We probably don't brag about it a lot or pat ourselves on the back, but I mean, it's remarkable what we've accomplished in the last 3-4 years, whether it be building a brand new correctional facility without raising tax dollars, the road work we've done out in western Sarpy. I mean, I could go on and on and on. But there's so many uncertainties that I don't know about and coming down the road, but there are some predictable major expenditures that I do know about that I worry about if we're going to have enough in reserve to meet any expenditure, either planned or unplanned, that may arise. Just a couple that come to mind are, Platteview Road project, the sewer agency, putting sewer infrastructure across the whole southern half of the county, continuing to provide equitable and competitive salaries and benefits for our employees, so we have a professional workforce. But probably the thing that I think will be most telling is if we do our job right, and if you build it, they will come. Our population could grow by 60,000 in the next 10 years, and with that 60,000 will come a lot of new requirements, both in terms of public safety and infrastructure. So that's the things that I think about, even though, I mean, it is a very enviable position to be with our bond rating and our careful steward and care of the funds that we have before us. But I still worry about some of the things that I just touched on that could require a lot of capital expenditures. And I want to make sure that we have that money parked away, because one of the things we may be criticized this year, as I've learned in politics, is no good deed goes unpunished. And although we've lowered our tax levy twice in the last 5 years, I don't think any other political subdivision I know of has done that. But what I worry about is in a year like this where we have excess funds and everybody's looking at us like we're greedy because we don't lower the tax levy, what I don't want to do is I want to give people predictability. So I don't want to lower the tax levy this year just to turn around next year and go, whoops, here comes all those things that keep me awake at night, and now we got to pay for them. So I would rather see some of those excess funds, whether they be inheritance or anything else, put aside, either marked against potential projects like you've done in our budget this year, or increase our cash reserve for potentials unknown. So I guess I don't really have a question, but I just wondered if I know you worry about, I know there could be stress during budget season, just like there is in every home. Every citizen in Sarpy County has to look at their budget and go, can I afford this or can't I? And so I just wondered if there was anything that jumped off at you immediately that'd be something that you'd want to just say, hey, we want to be on the lookout for this, or let's keep a close eye on this, because if we don't, it could come back to haunt us. So I'm glad there's...
I agree with what you're saying. I think it's
Okay.
important that we have a smooth property tax revenue stream. And if we lower the levy now, and we have a year where, say, the valuations are flat, perfectly flat at 0%, and we have to come back with a 10% levy increase or something just to make the budget work, that would be a shock, right?
Yes.
And so I think this budget is going to allow us to smooth that out. We're taking the excess, the valuation increase, and we're setting it aside, in essence. Much of it, not all of it, but some of it, using what we need to, and we're setting aside and establishing our reserves. And so I think we're doing exactly what you were hoping there.
So I think the art of this deal is to try to thread the needle. And every year I've been doing this, and I think this is my 10th budget now, it might be my 11th, I'm not sure. But every year we do this. The one thing I track really closely is what I used, in the military, we call it tooth to tail. You know, in the military, tooth are the combat soldiers. How many combat soldiers do we have versus how many total personnel do we have that provide the support that allow combat people to do what combat people do? I look every year at how much money we're spending on essential services. You know, the reason we're all here, the reason we have county government, and every year the cost of that doing that business goes up because, you know, insurance goes up, salaries go up, things beyond our control that we don't control go up, and that's probably the one thing I would say that keeps me up at night is. Can we deliver the services that we were elected to deliver in an efficient and effective manner that represents the constituents' interest and still balance that by taking care of our professional workforce? And it's really hard to thread that needle, but I think we've done a pretty good job of it. But I see with the growth coming on the future, that it's going to increase the demands on providing those services on our workforce. And that's the thing I think about is, you know, how are we going to prepare for that in the future, and how are we going to right size, if you will, and leverage technology to the greatest extent possible to, as we call it in the military, provide more tooth and less tail, more bang for the buck, if you will. So thanks again, Bill, for all your work.
I just have a comment on with Commissioner Kelly, and just to put what he's expressing into numbers, I'm just going to do it off of the revenue side. And the revenue side that I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there will be an additional $9 million from property tax.
Correct.
And you're putting 5.7 million of that into the reserves to keep us in good health. So that is 63.3%. So I would equate that to a simple calculation of we made more money. If I'm just working out on my own, I made more money, but I'm saving 63% of the money that I made. So I'm not spending it all. And we do need to have those reserves, just as you said, because the bond rating, all of that, you can equate that to anybody in their personal life. If you have a strong credit rating, you have a lot more advantages than someone that doesn't in the marketplace to get money, et cetera. So I wanted to share that because I think that's an important point. That yes, there's more money coming in, but we're not spending it. We're putting it in the reserve for that rainy day. And I share those concerns with Commissioner Kelly because we don't know what the future is going to bring going forward. And we have to be on guard for if and when things flatten in the real estate market and go downward, that we are going to have. It's going to happen. At what point and how fast or how gradual or how fast, we just don't know. But we have to be on guard for that because that will affect, obviously, assessed value and then the levies, et cetera. And again, I don't take any of this lightly because we are a small percentage of that taxpayer dollar that comes in versus the schools, et cetera. There are other things, and I'm going to be short here because I think the state of Nebraska really needs to get after looking at a different way to be funding the schools in this state because it's right now it's on the back of property owners, the majority of it. And it is just getting, with everything going up and up and up in valuation, it's getting to be a burden on our citizens, not just in Sarpy County, but in every county in the state. So there's more things that need to be done, but for now, I think you've put together, I think, the best budget that we could possibly see in this time frame. So thank you.
one comment and then one question for you, Bill. The comment is a lot of people don't understand the way the money comes in. And it's money left over from last year, plus your expected revenues is what gives you your money stream. And the money left over from last year is, thank you to everybody in this room. It's people that manage budgets. They manage budgets prudently and wisely, and that money comes back into the county's funding stream, which again helps to offset those taxes. The one thing, and Mr. Mixon hit it dead on the head, state's going to do something. Visiting with a couple of senators today, and the state is in the process. They're going to change property tax. I hope it's done gradually and that we can kind of figure the system out as they go through it. But my big question is, one of the things I think we're most at risk at losing pretty quick is inheritance tax. So on page 19, I saw where you had the little blue section and then the green, and inheritance tax is like $1.4 million. Why wouldn't we hold inheritance tax in reserves and then use tax dollars or other money? Is it a shell game? Does it really matter?
Well, I can go through what inheritance tax, the budget is for inheritance tax funds, and I'd be happy to spend that time. Let me just grab it out here. Our inheritance tax fund starts with just under $8 million coming into the year. And we have a whole host of projects. I know I shared that with at least one commissioner this past week that are that we have dedicated assigned uses or reserves for those dollars. We anticipate, and really the budget for inheritance revenue is a shot in the dark. I mean, we just don't know. But we do have a budgeted revenue for inheritance dollars next year of $2.5 million. So we could have a total, and I guess the total expense budget is about $10.5 million. So we have a whole series of projects that we have identified use for the inheritance. And since those are not, I think we should view inheritance dollars as non-recurring because they could go away. So we generally don't, we don't associate those with recurring projects, but what are the one-time projects that we can do around the county to really help improve the facilities, the operations, and so on. So I can, a couple of the big placeholders there are, there have been a lot of discussions, and I just came out of a meeting on the JJC. And so if there's a decision there on moving forward with an expansion or an addition, we have some money set aside for that. This board has talked a lot about a mental health initiative, and we've moved the funding in different places, but we have $1 million of our inheritance tax fund reserved for that project. We have a project on Highway 75 for the obstruction removal. We have some funds in for that. So I could go through the list. I don't know that that's the best use of the time, but we have a whole list of really specific projects. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the list, we have a gap of about $1.5 million that is unassigned. So I use those, as our policy states, I use that amount of money in the calculation of what our budgetary reserve is. Where in the past, we have in prior years, inheritance, we're not sure we're going to do all this. We'll use it for we'll tie it to projects and we'll use it for a budgetary reserve. That's not a good way to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I think the inheritance tax part points out how difficult your job is, Bill, because, inheritance tax, one, it could go away, but two, I don't have any idea how you budget for that because inheritance tax depends on who passes away and who they're giving their money to and what that percentage is in any given year. And so it fluctuates greatly, making your job difficult. I was pleased to see that we were able to we lowered the levy last year. We have a whole board of fiscal conservatives, and we're able to maintain that lower level this year in a time where wages are kind of all over the board, and work is all over the board, construction's all over the board. We have lots of projects going on and lots of unknowns. And so I think you've done a great job of trying to manage all of those things and listen to 5 different board members give guidance. And I just appreciate your hard work on all of those things.
And I just have one comment on the inheritance tax, and I know there's a push to eliminate the inheritance tax, but if there's also, NACO is working with the governor, et cetera, to make sure if that happens, that the state will pretty much pick that up and apply money back, because there's 93 counties in Nebraska, and I'm from an urban county, but there are 90 counties that are pretty much rural, and they depend heavily on the inheritance tax, and it would be devastating to their budgets. It would hurt us as well, the big 3 counties, somewhat, but not as much. So really, there's ongoing discussion about if the inheritance tax goes away, the state would come in and basically pick that up from other taxes to make the counties whole for that.
Well, and you may be alluding to, I mean, there's an argument, I'm not advocating for or against, but we have all sorts of unfunded mandates. Right. Where the legislature passes a bill that burdens the county with additional wages or additional operating costs that we don't have money for. And then they're putting a limit on our property taxes, but yet they're establishing that we have to do certain things. And so the inheritance dollars, again, not forming an opinion, but some argue that that's kind of an offset. If they can allow us to keep the inheritance, that allows us to fund, in essence, one way or another, these unfunded mandates.
Right, and NACO is the same thing on the unfunded mandates,
Yeah.
Pushing hard, because we are getting a lot of expenditure items are pushed down to us by legislation,
Yeah.
and it's without funding.
I would just simply offer a thank you, being on the Budget Committee again this year, for your guidance through that, and the work that you and Jenny have done is greatly appreciated.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Bill? Okay. Item 4.1A is removal of new positions from the 2024 proposed budget. Number 1, assessor, appraiser 1, commercial. Number 2, public defender, secretary 1, receptionist. Number 3, community corrections, mental health case manager. Number 4, sheriff, 2 deputies, school resource officer, and criminal investigator. What we'll do is open the public hearing for all of the issues. And what I'd like to do is, if you want to speak on a topic, please come forward in the front row here. And I'd like to take members of the public first before the elected officials that might want to speak, if possible. So if you'd like to speak on the topic, if you'll come to the front row, and then we'll take you in order.
If I can make one comment first. This was put on there more of a question on my part. I've looked at everything that's been justified by the office holders in regards to the positions, and honestly, I don't have any questions, and I don't know the mind of the board. I've got a pretty good feeling that the budget presented by Bill today is what's going to pass in its entirety. And again, no decisions made from this side. So I put it on there for a simple question. And I don't know if it would be Dan that answers this or Bill that answers this. Let's say, for instance, Mr. Striggins in his office does not hire that secretary receptionist. Does that money, is that a part of his budget that he can spend any way he wants, or can it only be used for that one purpose? I put everybody on the spot.
Yeah, the approved budget that goes to each department manager, elected official, it increases their budget. It can be used really for any purpose.
Right. That's always been my understanding, and I just want to make sure that that's the understanding of the board here. So whatever increases, it's still under the scrutiny of that office to spend the money however they see advised. And again, our